It's Monday on the North Shore Drive podcast of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and we got to talk about the things that are ailing the Steelers. It's not like they're oblivious. They know what's going wrong. We're going to talk about how they intend to fix those problems moving forward. I'm Chris Carter, host of the North Shore Drive podcast. We're going to be joined by Ray Fittipaldo, Steelers beat writer, both of us of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, right here talking all things Steelers on this Monday. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. And welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm Chris Carter. He's Ray Fittipaldo. We are both of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and this is your Monday, Wednesday, Friday show that you can get on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button of this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette sports content all the time right here. Today's episode is brought to you by Acrisure, introducing the Acrisure Fan Advantage and the power to project one of our Post-Gazette Steelers beat writers into your home or office. Using augmented reality, you can get an exclusive pregame breakdown from a Steelers expert standing right in your living room. Get the latest insights on starting lineups, key matchups, and critical stats at post-gazette.com/Acrisure Fan Advantage. No apps or downloads, just insider access to Steelers updates at post-gazette.com/Acrisure Fan Advantage and get a real edge on this week's action. As I said, I'd be joined by Ray Fittipaldo, Holy Cross Zone. He's repping his alma mater there. Ray, how's it going?
4-0, baby. Big win over the Colgate Red Raiders this past weekend, so we're rolling.
Yes, indeed. Holy Cross off to the hot start. That's awesome to hear. Ray, let's get into something that you wrote for this past weekend. You went into the Steelers locker room on Friday, right after the loss. It's still fresh in their minds. That's, you know, they're still dealing with that muck. And then you wrote a Saturday story about the same song and the same problems for this Steelers team, and especially for the defense. Right. You got that quote from talking to Terrell Edmonds, and it was obvious listening to that audio that you guys, when you guys were asking these questions, it was obvious the Steelers aren't unaware of what their problems are. They know that it's frustrating that the run defense wasn't able to stop the Browns, and that they lost to similar things that they saw from years past. I know they swept the Browns last year, but that looked very similar to some of their recent losses to the Browns in the past few years. Is there a sense from the team that's like, hey, we know how to fix it, or like, hey, this is frustrating and we might be dealing with this for a lot longer?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, two things. Edmonds did give us that same old song, so they know this is an issue going back to last season. And I found this interesting. He said they were dominated up front, and they can't let that happen. Now, we all saw a lot of missed tackles in the secondary. Edmonds had some, Minka had some, but you know, for a defensive back to come out and say that we were dominated up front tends to lead us to believe that, hey, maybe there are some issues with the front four, minus TJ Watt. Listen, they got Tyson Alualu back. That was supposed to help. Larry Ogunjobi was supposed to help. Cam is Cam. I haven't been able to put a finger on exactly what's going on there. I'm sure TJ's absence has a little bit to do with it, but anytime an opponent runs for like 171 on you, and now over 3 games you're giving up an average of almost 143 a game, that's a big problem. You cannot survive in this league. We saw it last year. They had the miracle finish to make the playoffs, but you cannot survive in this league giving up that many rushing yards every single game. It just puts too much on your secondary, doesn't put you in position to make turnovers, and it's a problem they have to find a solution for very, very quickly.
When you look at this team and you're giving your grades, do you look at it as like this is a personnel problem? Like this is just a problem that they're not going to be able to solve unless they get different talent? When I looked at this, I saw very good attentiveness against the run against the Bengals. They were able to take, neutralize Joe Mixon. He wasn't erased from the game, but he wasn't a factor in the last 2 games, especially the second half of the Patriots and the entire Browns game. It looked like they were just slow to the punch, and it seemed like maybe they were tired. I know Cam Hayward talked about, being out there for a lot of snaps. Do you think that's a bigger problem than maybe like, actual problems that would be on their own if they were fully rested?
Yeah, I mean, listen, fatigue does come into factor. They played 100 snaps against the Bengals. They have averaged 80 snaps per game on defense. Now,
Ridiculous.
For people who don't, follow the NFL closely and aren't into the weeds on snap counts and stuff, I mean, depending on the week, Chris, you're looking at anywhere from 58 to 70 snaps per game. That's probably somewhere in the average somewhere.
Yeah.
For them to be up to 80 is absolutely ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
And listen, we asked those questions in the locker room. They're not going to come out and say they're tired, right? I mean, players aren't going to say that. But if you read the tea leaves a little bit, the offense having a bunch of 3-and-outs in the second halves of the last couple of games, not being able to generate points or eat up clock in the second halves of these games, it's a big issue. But again, Chris, I come back to the fact that this is the highest paid defense in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
Even without TJ Watt, you got Minka still there. You got Cam.
Yep.
They're paying all kinds of money to Miles Jack. They're paying all kinds of money to Larry Ogunjobi.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody's got to be able to step up and stop the bleeding. This is still a team with Mitch Trubisky at quarterback.
Yeah.
Going to have to win with defense, and somebody's got to step up in TJ Watt's absence, and they just haven't been able to find that formula the past 2 weeks against the Pats or Thursday night against the Browns.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I know that they weren't the highest paid defense in the league last year, but they also didn't win a single game without TJ Watt last year. So this is going on 2 years when he's not there. This defense can't win. Now, maybe that's also a sign that maybe he is the most valuable defensive player in the league. But still, if you are the Steelers, you don't have time to make excuses for that and to say oh, well, TJ's not in. It's okay if you lose. If they lose to the Jets this upcoming week, they could be staring at a 1-7 record when they get to the bye week, because there is a gauntlet of teams coming up in the Buccaneers, the Bills, the Eagles, and the Dolphins. 2 of those teams are 3-0. And some of those teams could be 3-0 if they had just a few things have gone their way. So, it's there's a lot of concern for this team. And again, like you were saying, the reason it's the most expensive defense because they wanted to win with defense. They knew it wasn't going to be an easy road with Mitch Trubisky on offense. This team has to be led by its defense.
And let's look at the coaching aspect of this, right?
Yes.
Mike Tomlin has been in charge of this defense for how many years? He's got a senior role in this. Mm-hmm. Terrell Austin getting his, I think it's his 3rd chance now to be a defensive coordinator.
Yes, correct.
In this league, okay. He was expected to bring in some new ideas. And then you have Brian Flores, who comes in, with all of his knowledge from Miami and from the Patriots. So I know it's early. I know it's only 3 games in. We probably should say, listen, the first month of the season is a feeling out process for all the teams, right?
Right.
But there has to be a sense of urgency because, like you said, Chris, if they don't beat the Jets on Sunday, this road is looking awfully, awfully tough. It's going to be really hard for them to stay in the conversation if they don't find a way to win Sunday at Acrisure.
I agree entirely. You can't, if you put yourself in that position, you're going to be in a rough spot. And you're also, you're right. This is a defense that entirely was based on, being able to carry this team to wins. And right now, and points allowed is a very, out there stat. It's very general. There's a lot of things that could be taken out of context, but right now they are 18th in the NFL with 66 allowed points, and 22 points allowed per game ain't so bad, but this defense was built to make that number even lower than it already is. Because I think if you had a normal offense, like if this was the 2017 offense, the Steelers would be great. Like they'd be in a really good position. They'd probably be undefeated right now. But the fact of the matter is the way this team's constructed, that defense has to carry these wins, and that's just what they haven't done yet. Well, outside of the Bengals game.
Hey, I'm not saying the Steelers defense has played bad.
Right.
We're just talking about, if you look at these games in the second half, what it comes down to is complementary football, right?
Yes.
Okay. The defense did their job in the third quarter, early in the fourth quarter against the Patriots. Then they couldn't get off the field. The offense didn't do it. They just didn't have enough juice to win that game. And similar things happened in that Browns game, Chris. The score was still, I think, a field goal type of a game. Deontay Johnson drops that pass. I think it was late in the third quarter.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, the Browns go down to score. All of a sudden, it's a 2-score game, and things get out of hand. I think when you're asking Mr. Trubisky to bring you back from more than one score down. Okay, so things just kind of snowball on them. They kind of tend to make mistakes at inopportune times. And we all know what the formula is. It shouldn't be a surprise. We knew the way they were building this team in March. We saw what they did in April with the draft, how they're building for the future on offense, and the defense was going to have to carry things early. And just due to game circumstances, due to some bad luck, some bad mistakes at the wrong time, they're kind of in the position they are right now, where they're 1-2, and having to scrap and claw for everything they get.
Absolutely. We'll talk about that offense in just a minute because, like you said, this is a built for the future offense, but the present is right here, and they need to find answers right now. We'll talk about that in just a minute here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. But first, we got to talk to you guys about one of our great sponsors, Liquid Death. You may see your coworkers cracking up a can at your 9 a.m. meeting, but it's most likely not a beer. It's most likely the new Mountain Spring water brand called Liquid Death. Why is this water called Liquid Death? Well, it's because it'll brutally murder your thirst. And at the same time, their infinitely recyclable tallboy cans are helping to bring death to plastic bottles. They'll also donate 10% of the profits from every can sold to help kill plastic pollution on the planet. We all know how harmful plastic is to the environment, and we also know how good water is for you. So why not help out both situations with a tall, cold can of Liquid Death? Go to Liquid Death go get Liquid Death at your local Target, 7-Eleven, or county fair, or find a Liquid Death retailer near you with their store located at liquiddeath.com/shore. That's liquiddeath.com/shore. We're also brought to you by MyBookie. You know football and you pick the winners all the time. So why not get paid to do that at MyBookie? Bet single games, game spreads, money lines, or parlay multiple games together to increase your payrolls. Low contest entry fees, and over a half a million to be won. Make it so you don't have to be a pro gambler to have fun. Getting started is easy. Just visit mybookie.ag and use promo code NSD, that's NSD for North Shore Drive, on your first deposit to secure a double deposit bonus. That's promo code NSD to get your first deposit matched dollar for dollar all the way up to $1,000. MyBookie is a proven sports book that makes it simple to bet and simple to win. So make this your winning season exclusively at MyBookie. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm Chris Carter. He's Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's talk about the offense because, like you said, as we can talk about the defense not dominating, which this defense does need to do for this team to be a competitive team in the NFL. The defense isn't the weakest part of this team. It's still the offense, and we've kind of heard this for a little bit. Mason Cole brought it up, last week that the Steelers offense still has to find its identity, but. Yep. What is this offense's identity? Like I guess it's tough to say until we see it click for an entire game or at least for part of a game. But what is the thing that you think that this offense, if there's one thing to rely upon, to lean up on in the toughest of moments, that this offense can look to?
I think they're still searching for it, Chris. I mean, they ran the ball well in the first half against the Browns, and then just due to the game circumstances or the Browns shutting it down, there was next to nothing in the running game in the second half. I think Najee had 10 yards after halftime. Jaylen Warren didn't get another carry. I think Tomlin was a little bit gun-shy about going back to him after the fumble. But I think they would like to say it's the running game. But as you said, I mean, where's the consistency from half to half or game to game? They just don't have it. And then when you look at the passing game, I don't think they can, and I don't think they want to hang this on Mitch Trubisky and those young receivers. It's obvious that they're working George Pickens in slowly. I'm kind of at a loss for why, to be quite honest with you. I think he's the most talented receiver they have on that football team, and I think they have to use him. And Deontay Johnson is obviously number one, and he's good in the short and intermediate. But George Pickens is your big play guy, and I think you're fighting against yourself when he's having one catch a game and he's getting targeted 3 times. 5 times, and he's not really a big part of the game plan. So to answer your question, I still don't know. We're heading into week 4 here, and I don't have an answer for you. I think this Jets game is going to be very telling. This is not a very good football team that's coming into Acrisure, and I think you have to build off some good things, from that Browns game. See if maybe you can run consistently, for an entire game, and then maybe build some play action off of that. Maybe do some other things off of that. But yeah, I don't feel good about this offense at all right now in terms of what its identity actually is.
I mean, who should feel good about this offense? I mean, they haven't provided anything, but it's crazy to me, Ray, because these are talented skill players the Steelers have. Pat Freiermuth is a good tight end. Najee Harris, I mean, we've seen. Yep. Give him a little bit of space, and he's going to make it work. The touchdown run that he had, where he was shoving John Johnson off of his face mask, as he was going into the end zone. It's clear these guys can make plays. George Pickens, I mean, the one-handed catch that he made, like you said, get him the ball some. But there seems to be a problem, a lack of consistency to find any way to get the ball in those guys' hands. I know that the Steelers in the past have been a very quick passing team to, get the ball out of Ben's hands to try to get the ball into the hands of your playmakers. Is there a way to streamline that from Mitch Trubisky to these guys without making it so obvious that, hey, this is just going to be the same quick passing offense that the defenses were able to kind of keep track of last year? Is there a way to make that easier that maybe Matt Canada hasn't tried yet?
I think getting the running game going and going to that play action. I don't think we've seen that missing for many, many years when Ben was a quarterback, and that was supposed to change this year. The play action passing, the action off the run game was supposed to be a big part of that. People always talk about the middle of the field. Why aren't the Steelers throwing to the middle of the field? Well, play action is the actual
way
that's
to get
when
there.
You want to do it, right? You hand it off, you draw the linebackers in, you throw it over top to Pat Freiermuth running down the seams. It just hasn't been there. They haven't done a lot of it in 3 games. I mean, to me, when you saw them throw short to George Pickens the other day, to me, George Pickens, I mean, he's got a lot of talent, but I don't necessarily know if you want to run him on screens and then ask him to, be your little scat back screen receiver. I'd rather see Deontay Johnson do that.
Yeah,
Gunnar Olszewski, somebody like that. I mean, use these guys' skills where they can help your offense the best. I mean, Pickens, could run him down the field. You could use him in the intermediate game. Johnson is sort of a receiver for any situation. And then you have your other guys, Claypool can play in the slot. To me, Chris, when I talk about Pickens being targeted more, I would say Chase Claypool. I haven't looked at the stats recently. He's probably got double the targets of George Pickens. And what has he produced in the passing game thus far? 28 yards receiving in the one game. I mean, it's all under 30 or 35 yards with 6 or 7 targets a game. I mean, what are we doing here?
Yeah. That's a good question.
Find some roles for these guys where they could help your football team. I just like we talked about at the top. There is no identity. They're still trying to figure out their roles, and until they do, it's going to be a tough road to hoe.
Let's talk about that for a second. The targets so far on the season. Leading target for the Steelers, Deontay Johnson with 33, Pat Freiermuth with 21, Chase Claypool with 18, George Pickens with 12, Najee Harris with 11. Then you get those guys down there. Yeah. That's the breakdown right now. It's a lot to Deontay Johnson. Claypool has 18, George Pickens is 12. And like you said, right now, of those, if you're looking at Claypool, he's caught 11 of those 18 passes for 79 yards. Pickens has caught 5 of those 12 passes, but for 65 yards. So he, with six less targets and 6 less catches, he's only 14 yards behind Chase Claypool. Granted, a big chunk of that is because of the one-handed catch that went 36 yards. But I do think finding ways to get him the ball would boost this offense. I think some of this offense, you can't depend on them to be just a drive down the field, convert a lot of third downs, type of group. They need their shot plays. And like you said, play action is one way to do it. I think for our listeners and our viewers on YouTube, can you explain how play action does open up the middle part of the field. Because when we say that, sometimes that you and me, we get it. But I think the average person that's just a football fan is like, okay, yeah, I hear that, but why is that the case? And I think you can do a great job explaining what it does to defenses.
So if you're getting chunk plays in the running game, Chris, let's say
Yes.
you're ripping off 5, 6, 8-yard runs in the running game on a consistent basis, and you're moving the chains that way, eventually defensive coordinators have to make an adjustment. So you saw the Browns last week. They're playing the 2 high safety. They were almost inviting the Steelers to run the ball, and
Right,
they did a great job with it in the first half.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if the Steelers can do that consistently over the course of a game, and they're in a one-score game or they're even leading in a game, then the defensive coordinator is going to have to say, "Hey, my strong safety, you got to come down in the box. We can't be getting gashed for 8-yard runs." I mean,
Right.
that just puts our secondary in a tough situation. So then when you do that, you're handing the ball off to Najee Harris. If you're doing that consistently, then you pull it down, you tuck it, and then you run a tight end where the safety would be. You could run your receivers into that same area. You could draw the linebackers up and do the same type of a thing. So, that's sort of what we're talking about there. But as you know, Chris, if you're not consistent in the run game and those defensive coordinators and those safeties and those inside linebackers don't respect your running game, then that's just not going to be there. That's not going to, magically appear if you don't run the ball.
We'll talk about how they're going to run the ball and how this offensive line is performing in the next segment, because I think that's another part of this. And the offensive line, they're a different part of their year that I thought they'd be through 3 games in. We'll talk about that with Ray Fittipaldo in a minute here on the North Shore Drive podcast. But first, we got to talk to you guys about our friends over at Yinzers in the Berg. Now, Yinzers in the Berg is your #1 Pittsburgh sports apparel company. If you want to get Steelers clothes, you want to get Pirates clothes, you want to get Penguins clothes, Pitt, all of that can be had at Yinzers in the Berg. So listen up, Yinzers. The Steelers campaign is off and running, so show your support for your black and gold. And the Penguins has started their training camp. So if you want to get gear getting ready for that, it's going to be easy for you. All you got to do is go to the 2 legendary shops in the Strip District. Plus, they have a growing online store. Yinzers in the Berg is the place to go for your Pittsburgh sports apparel, accessories, and much, much more. We'll see you in the Strip District, or check them out online at yinzerspgh.com. That's yinzerspgh.com for all your Pittsburgh sports apparel. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast, I'm Chris Carter. He's Ray Fittipaldo. We are of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and we're talking about your Pittsburgh Steelers. This is a Steelers offensive line that was thought to be a terrible group going into the year. They were going to Mitch Trubisky was just going to be running for his life every game. He was going to be getting sacked every play. And Kenny Pickett, there's no way you could put him in at any point in time because he would just be under siege. But Ray, I thought they've actually looked pretty good in pass protection. We'll get to the run blocking part of this in a second, but Pat Meyer seems to have gotten this group to be a lot more on the same page than they were last year.
Yeah, I mean, listen, and they did some things against the Browns where they kept Najee in, and they kept their tight ends in, and you got to do that against elite pass rushing teams, especially after what we saw out of Dan Moore in the preseason.
Mm-hmm.
You're not game planning like that in the preseason, so they got an idea. Okay, this is where he struggles. This is what he can do. So in a perfect situation, in a game against Myles Garrett and a good pass rushing team, they helped him out, which you should do. I mean, these are things that, we talk about, you have a #1 overall pick like Myles Garrett going up a 4th rounder. I mean, you are going to have matchups in football games that aren't always advantageous for you.
Right.
Where coaching comes in is you have to put them in situations where you could actually help them out and do their job. So I thought that was much better. Just being able to game plan. I think when we were watching the preseason, I think we were seeing what they were all about, but the coaches were also seeing, okay, we're going to put them on an island in the preseason. We're going to see if they can sink or swim, and if they can't, then we have to sort of adjust. So I think they're still doing that. They're still getting the ball out relatively quickly, so they're not asking those guys to pass protect for very long. But when it comes down to it, Chris, I'm kind of with you. I think they've been solid overall for what they are. For a bunch of 4th round picks,
yeah.
And guys coming in free agency, we're still kind of learning on the run and learning how to play together. From a pass protection standpoint, it's actually been pretty solid.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. I mean, you got what Chukuma Okorafor was a third rounder, Dan Moore was a fourth rounder, Kevin Dotson a fourth rounder, and then you got Mason Cole and James Daniels thrown in there just this year at free agency. You know, this is a group that's kind of gelled a little bit here, and I was giving them until week 8 before I wanted to see like real progress and be like, okay, now let's start grading this team with a curve of you need to be on this unit to be on a better situation than we thought they'd be. But I mean, like that Jaguars game that they went up against them in the preseason, they looked abysmal. And it was like, oh man, this is going to be a long season for that unit. But it wasn't. That it hasn't been that case through 3 games. But they do need to get better in run blocking. Now, granted, I don't know about you, Ray. I thought I've seen some improvement in the run blocking, especially against the Browns. There were times I'm like, there's better combo blocks. There's better chemistry. These guys are feeling each other, when to team up together. And some of that just does come with time.
It does. And, you mentioned the free agents coming in. So Mason Cole is the new center. He's got to figure out a way to work with James Daniels. I mean, those guys were in the same division last year, but they were on different teams. So, there's a learning process there. And then on the other side, Mason Cole, he's got to figure out how to block with Kevin Dotson. So all these different guys learning, not only are a lot of them learning new techniques with a new offensive line coach, but they're learning how to play with each other too. And I think everyone wanted to see that happen in the spring, but it's hard. OTAs, they're out there in helmets and shorts. Okay, if it's not going to happen in the spring, let's see it happen in training camp. Okay. Didn't really happen in training camp, but if what we're seeing now are baby steps, I think that's okay. As long as this unit continues to grow and gel over time, I think they can be good enough that we can see some strides, but listen, they're not going to turn into Mike Webster and John Colt from the Super 70s teams anytime soon either. I mean, they until they start putting some resources into that group in the draft, I don't think we're ever going to see elite play from this group. But for what they are for this year, I mean, I think baby steps is fine right now. Just keep improving week by week, and maybe we will see some consistency in that run game as the weeks go on.
That's what they're looking for, is some sign of consistency. Even if it's that, hey, you're a middling offensive line group. If you would give it, if you talked to a Steelers fan last year and you said, hey, next year you guys will have a middle of the NFL type of offensive line, people would have been praising, going to Sunday service and thanking Jesus for it, because that's what they wanted. They were just not terrible. And I think that's where this offensive line is heading. But I think another important question, Ray, not just for this year, but for this offensive line moving forward, because you have to assume they're going to invest in it. When the Steelers offensive line was bad in the late 2000s, Mike Tomlin, Kevin Colbert, they made a point to get Marquise Pouncey, David DeCastro, Marcus Gilbert, building blocks that built the offensive line for the last decade that we saw. Who are the guys that are on this offensive line right now that you think could be part of such a future built offensive line that could come from a first round pick next year, a second round pick the year after that, something along those lines?
That's a great question, Chris. I think Chooks, they gave him, they're giving him $10 million a year. And I know there was an out in that contract where if he was bad this year that they can get out from under that. But I think he's played well. I think Chooks is their best offensive lineman right now.
Mm-hmm.
Now after that, I sort of view Mason Cole, not as a placeholder, but I think he's easily a guy who could in a year or two become your top reserve on the interior, assuming they go out and get a center in the draft either next year, 2023 or 2024. They signed him to a 3-year deal. He's making like $5 million a year. I mean, he is what he is.
Mm-hmm.
I think they were hoping James Daniels would be kind of like a building block in the future, so they wouldn't have to go out and necessarily draft a guard. I mean, guards are tough. I mean, you don't really want to draft a guard in the first round. I mean, DeCastro was
an outlier.
I mean, teams do it, but it happens. You only see 1 or 2 guards go in the first round every single year. So that's a tough position to kind of invest a lot of resources in. So I thought, James Daniels hasn't been, I think, what they were hoping for, but maybe as he finds his footing, maybe he can develop into that. So for me, Daniels and Okorafor The others, I think you can draft over them. Listen, I think we keep hearing about Dan Moore and how much Tomlin likes him, but I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
I want to see it. Like, I want to see why they're so excited about him, but I don't know. I'm not there yet, Chris.
And historically, when you think about great Steelers offensive linemen, Cole was one of the few tackles that you could think back and be like, oh yeah, he was great. But you think about guards and centers a lot of times. Is that something that could change? Do you think like the tackle could be a position that they should target over, say, an interior offensive lineman? Because there's a lot of offensive lines that are based on their tackles nowadays.
Well, I think we saw that a couple of years. What year was it, Chris? Excuse me. Where was it when they took Najee and the Vikings took an offensive lineman right before them?
Yeah. I forget his name, but I know I know. Let me pull that up real quick because we got our good old friend Google over here.
He was in the 20s,
right? Because he would have been 21. Because
and the Vikings snatched him up right before the Steelers did. So
or he was 23. Christian Darrisaw. That's who he was. Yeah.
Right. So a lot of people thought, if he was there, the Steelers could have taken him. So, listen, the Steelers they've had Marvell Smith in the second round. They've had Marcus Gilbert in the second round.
Yeah.
They've had solid tackles, but in terms of that 10-year guy that's going to make a lot of money on a second contract, they haven't had that, that type of a guy. So, I don't know. I just think you have to go back. I mean, here's the simple solution, Chris.
Right.
The best offensive lineman in the draft when you pick next April, whether it's number 10 overall, number 15 overall, if that guy is the best player on the board, whether it's a guard, center, or tackle, just take the best player and then sort of figure it out from there. I think that's where they are with this offensive line right now. I don't think they're a piece or two away, right? I think they're kind of still kind of figuring out where everyone fits. So I think draft the best offensive lineman available if there's value there in the draft next season, and just build your line that way. I don't think they have to focus on we need a tackle, we need a center, we need a guard. They've kind of filled that, through the draft and free agency. They're kind of solid right now, but I think if they still need that one building block, that one guy that they could sort of build that line around. I don't think they have that Pro Bowl type lineman on their roster right now.
I agree. And we've seen how well, when you get a couple anchors, it makes everyone else's job so much easier. I mean, when Pouncey and DeCastro in there, you could afford to put Ramon Foster. Not that Ramon Foster was bad, but he was an undrafted player. You didn't have to invest in someone high. You could put Ramon Foster in, a solid player, and put him next to a great player like Pouncey, and they would be a heck of a duo. Same thing for Alejandro Villanueva. Not a highly sought-after player in the NFL, but when you plug him on an offensive line where Marcus Gilbert's blocking really well on the right side and DeCastro and Pouncey are doing great in the middle, you can kind of have guys that aren't invested into. And I think that's also what you look at with this offensive line is that, hey, if Jakumo Okorafor can be solid, and if one or two more guys can just be solid, getting a guy like Maryland senior offensive tackle Jalen Duncan, Northwestern offensive tackle Peter Skoronski, got guys like those who are going to be in this, Broderick Jones of Georgia. There's guys out there who could be really good offensive linemen in this draft class that the Steelers could absolutely target, whether it's Paris Johnson Jr. of Ohio State, Andrew Voorhees of USC. There's going to be players that they can go after. I do think that the Steelers could be looking at a situation where, like, hey, we have the shell in place. Now let's put the superstar or the star guy that's gonna carry this group. Heck, you saw, Ray, in 2010, Marquise Pouncey got plugged into an offensive line that was meh the year before, and it improved drastically with just his presence in the middle.
Yeah, you need that big horse. And, for a while there, the Steelers had a couple of horses. I mean, with DeCastro and Pouncey in there. I mean, you're right, Chris. I mean, one or two guys can change kind of like the overall view that we have of this line. But, I mean, I could argue that they've waited a year or two too long to actually go out and address that. But what they've done, I mean, listen, it might work out. You got Pickens. I mean, Pickens looks like he's going to be a player once they figure out how to use him. You got Harris. I mean, I think they're all disappointed that they're not getting more out of him. But I don't think it necessarily shines poorly on him. I just think it's It's an overall team thing where the offense isn't where it needs to be to get the full Najee Harris effect. So you're right. If Freiermuth came in the second round, maybe they could have drafted a lineman instead there. I think that was the Creed Humphrey year, right?
Yeah, that's the Creed Humphrey pick that a lot of people before and after the draft were like, that might have been the better move. But a Creed Humphrey could be more, might be more valuable to this offense than a Pat Freiermuth. So that's what it is. But this week they're geared. The Steelers were, looking, coming back from the future outlook, looking at the present. You got to look at what they got to do against the Jets. Ray Fittipaldo will be in the locker room all week long. Mike Tomlin speaks Tuesday. Read all the work that we have covering the Pittsburgh Steelers at post-gazette.com. Ray, thanks so much for doing the show with me. It's always a pleasure to do this show, gearing people up for the week of the Steelers. Read his work. He's going to have a special feature coming out this weekend in the Sunday paper, getting you ready for Steelers Jets. I'm Chris Carter of the North Shore Drive podcast. We'll be checking you guys out. I'll be back Wednesday with Jason Mackey, breaking all things down in Pittsburgh sports. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you're watching this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down below in the description.